All right, guys, so I'm very honored to have our guest, Craig Stull. He's been an entrepreneur for 23 years and has business experience way beyond that. And he's also the author of Tuned In and successfully sold his business as well. Thanks for having us, Craig.
My pleasure.
What was your occupation? I know I understand that you're semi-retired right now.
No, I'm retired.
You're retired, okay. All right. So,
I started a business and ran it for 23 years before I sold it. And so I pretty much did every job in the company, because initially it was just me, and eventually I just ran the company as CEO.
Okay. And how long were you active CEO for?
For the first 7 years, our business was conducting seminars, and for the first 7 years I was teaching seminars. And then the business got big enough that I needed to focus more on running it. So out of the 23, about 2/3 of that was being CEO.
And what was the company's focus, if you don't mind me asking? What was the main, what made that company unique?
Well, what we did is we conducted training seminars, both in a public setting as well as on-site for companies, teaching initially just software companies, and then expanded to mostly technology companies on how to market their products, product management and product marketing.
When did you first realize that you wanted to be involved in all that?
The concept behind pragmatic marketing predates the company by several years. The genesis of the idea came from a 1-hour seminar that I attended that was titled, "What Does It Mean to Be Market Driven?" And I was really inspired by the presenter, Dr. Fred Webster. And when I returned from the seminar, I had implemented, or at least attempted to implement, some of the concepts that he talked about in software companies where I worked. Did that in 3 different software companies. And I found it really useful, but what also struck me is the people in those companies were like, wow, this is great. And so I started conducting this seminar internally for those companies, and then eventually started Pragmatic and did it for other companies.
What advice would you have for people entering your specific field?
Well, my advice for anybody starting up a company is to do the things that we taught in our seminars. Wrote a book. This was in 2009, actually 2008 when the book came out, called Tuned In. And it captures the essence of what we taught in our seminars. Ironically, particularly with technology companies, people think, well, I have this problem, and if I solve my problem, everybody will want to buy it because everybody else has that problem. And the fallacy there is if you build something for yourself, you might be building it for a market of one. And so what we taught in our seminars is, before you spend any money building a product or a service, you need to get out in the market. You need to talk to potential buyers of this thing and understand what problems they have. So the first is very qualitative. We're just looking for problems. Once you find something that you could solve, then you want to go in another stage of quantifying it. How many people have this problem? Is it an urgent problem? There's no sense in building a solution that they don't care if they solve it now or 5 years from now. Pervasiveness, how many have it, and are they willing to pay someone else to solve the problem? Some problems people have, they want to solve it themselves, which I think in some ways is why for example, the grocery delivery business is slow to take off. It's been around for a long time, but people want to go and pick out their own bananas in many cases now. Yeah. Maybe millennials, because they've become comfortable with ordering online.
Right.
But solving a problem that people will actually pay someone else to solve is part of the 3 things that we look for. When it comes to solving problems.
You mentioned earlier about that you went to a seminar and inspired you for your business idea. What is some content that you would recommend for anybody that's starting a business?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, you really need to understand your potential buyers. So going to places where they hang out and just sit in the back of the room and listen. there may be a speaker in the front of the room talking about something provocative. I sort of listen to that, but I really listen to the people who raise their hand and ask questions, because in a way they're expressing a problem they have. And when you see heads nodding saying, yeah, I've got that problem too, how do you solve that? Those are the ones I want to note. And just visiting one-on-one with prospective buyers and answering or asking a lot of open-ended questions. Tell me about your day. Tell me how you do what you do. As opposed to walking in with a prototype and saying, what do you think of this product? Right. They may give you an idea. But then you tend to say, well, what do you think it's worth? And they don't know how to price the product. You don't know how to price the product. Mm-hmm. But if you can understand the kind of impact it's going to have on their job or their life, then you can weigh what kind of price they'd be willing to pay for it.
Well, I think we learned a lot of content just through that, so thank you.
Yeah, and as far as other types of content, I've mentioned my book. That gives you a lot of ideas about how you understand the market and how you build products that solve problems for people, which is absolutely essential. There's too many products, particularly technology products, that you install it and you go, who built this thing? You know, it's too hard to use, or I don't understand what it's supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. And that's somebody who built it because they thought it was cool as opposed to solving a real problem.
Right. So you mentioned your book, Tuned In. Mm-hmm. So I know you mentioned a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about that book.
We felt that writing a book would help our brand and help people understand what we're all about. It also gives you a taste of what the seminar that people are paying $3,000 for in a $30 book. First of all, I never want to write a book again. It's a whole lot of work. Yeah. And the three of us got together, myself, the president, and a consultant. We put the book together. And it did quite well. For the first 3 weeks, it was the #1 selling book of all books on Amazon. Wow. So we placed a ton of them out there. And in the long run, it also helped not only the brand, but when someone would go to our seminar and come back and they need to convince their vice president of marketing that they should send more people to the seminar, they could hand them the book and they could get an idea of what pragmatic marketing was all about.
So Craig, what were the top challenges that you faced while running this business, and how did you overcome them?
Well, there's a lot of challenges when you start your first business, probably the biggest one was finding the right people. I had to replicate what I was doing, conducting these seminars with people who preferably had the same skill set, that had been a vice president in a software company before, and had experience implementing the kind of things that I was teaching. So finding those people, they had to be great presenters, they had to have hands-on experience, and they had to be willing to travel as much as 50 weeks a year. So we did a pretty good job. We had a pretty strong filter to find the right kind of people, but inevitably you make mistakes, and so that's probably the biggest challenge. And then as the company grew, a friend of mine told me that when you get to 100 employees, you're going to have one of everything. You're going to have a drug addict, you're going to have a drug dealer, you're going to have a pedophile. I mean, you're going to have everything. Yeah. And we never got anywhere near 100 people, but we started running into that. In the early days, I used to always say, this was a whole lot easier when we only had 6 employees, but when you're getting up to 30 or 40 employees, you spend a whole lot of time managing, supervising, and dealing with people, which kind of takes the fun away from focusing on the customers. Right,
that makes sense. All right, so Craig, this is a tough question, kind of a scary question, but I feel like it's important for people, because this is inevitably going to happen at one point. What was one of the biggest failures that you've had during your career, and how did you overcome it?
Well, we were fortunate to avoid a really big failure. What we tended to focus on was catching small failures and not beating up an employee for making a mistake. People make mistakes. What we tried to do was, when we discovered it, is how can we prevent this from happening again in the future? Again, it kind of goes back to trust but verify. We would verify that a mistake had been made, and then we'd collectively get together and look for a way of avoiding that in the future. So no one big major failure, but lots of little ones. And sometimes they're just what seemed like little things. Accounting was getting ready to wire money to a customer as a refund. And I always looked at things when I signed them. Some executives don't, but I looked at it and I go, oh, okay, but wiring money back. First thing that caught my eye was it was initially charged on a credit card, so normally you would refund it to the credit card. And the second thing is the wire was going to a bank in Africa.
Red flag.
So I started drilling a little deeper and found out that the reason they weren't putting it back on the credit card was a very complicated story. It was a bank in Nigeria. Some more Googling found out that this was a scam that many seminar companies were getting sucked into. And it was over $20,000
Wow.
that once the wire's gone, it's gone. So again, I didn't admonish anybody for not catching that. It's just how do we put procedures in place to prevent that kind of failure from happening again.
So how do you build a company to the point where you can sell it?
It's a really good question, and I've only sold one company, so I'm not an expert in this. But certainly, the sale that we made was a big win for us. To start with, you need a product or service that is well received by the market. Having consistent growth, consistent profitability, which is hard to do in the early years, but that really needs to be a goal, because ultimately whoever's going to buy it is usually going to buy it based on EBITDA, profit, because they want to, if it's a financial investor, they're going to look at reselling the company in anywhere from 3 to 7 years. So they want to grow it, jump on that growth curve, maybe enhance the growth curve. Another option for selling the company is more of a strategic sale. So you built some technology that maybe a bigger company would like to acquire. And you see a lot of that in technology. Mm-hmm. And that was not, ours was a financial buy. So in that case, you've got to be more nimble than the big company who acquires you. Certainly Apple or Microsoft could, or Google could build the technology themselves, but big companies sometimes are just not agile enough to see these problems and apply technology to solve them. So as a startup, if you can find a problem, solve it, it's easier for the big company to just acquire you than it is to find the problem and solve it themselves.
Although you sold your business, are you still involved in any way with the company?
Well, I have a seat on the board, which pretty much is a day a quarter. It's not a significant drag for me, but it provides for the board some history, because some of the top management is not with the company anymore. And so when they're thinking about, well, maybe we should try this, and then they can turn to me and say, have you ever tried that before? How did it work out? And if we tried something and it failed, I'm more than willing to admit that we either didn't have the resources to properly do it, or we just screwed up and didn't do it right. Mm-hmm. But it gives them a historical perspective on how the company operated in the past.
Okay, that's great. One day a month, that must be nice.
One day a quarter.
One day a quarter,
Right.
Yeah, for that fact, even more nice.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to your past self who was just starting out in the business?
I think in retrospect, if I had known the impact that a sales organization could have on the company, we didn't hire our first sales rep for about 6 years. I was doing the sales, but I had a lot of other things that I was doing with the company. We had an administrative person who would fill out a lead sheet and throw it in the corner, and the lead sheets were purple. And when we hired our first sales rep, we had a stack of lead sheets maybe a foot thick. And within 3 months, she had doubled our revenue. So I think many times companies, startup companies, underestimate the impact that a professional sales organization, professional salesperson can have on the company. So I probably would have done that sooner and hired more, and hiring the right kind of people, which was always a challenge with sales, because it was an intangible, it's a service. At the same time, it's fairly technical, because you're talking to marketing directors and vice presidents, so it helps if you know something about the challenges they're faced with. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it requires sales skills, and finding the right mix of that was always a challenge. Ironically, finances were never really an issue for us. From the very beginning, we were successful. Mm-hmm. We ran it in a frugal way, so we didn't overhire, we didn't overspend, and just kind of bootstrapped ourselves. So many companies face that, I think because they think they have to spend a whole lot of money to make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. It really came into impact when it was time to sell the company. We had actually a 3-year plan to make myself irrelevant. We accomplished that in about 2 years. And after a year of being irrelevant, I'm going, why do I still keep this place? Yeah. But it became a great story, and that's another thing I would have advised myself, is you got to really think long term about how we're going to sell this company. What's the exit strategy that goes along with that? Because buyers are looking for a nice growth curve that they can latch onto and maybe accelerate the growth curve. But they're also looking at the management team. Is it going to stay in place, or is it going to exit? Mm-hmm. So having all those things well thought out in advance makes a huge difference when it comes time to put it on the market. Right,
and that's something most people don't think about when they're starting a big organization, is the exit strategy. So that's really that's actually really good advice. Yeah.
Well, we sold the company in 2016, and they looked back to 2008 and they go, well, how come you didn't do so well in 2008, 2009? It's like, well, there was a macroeconomic meltdown. Yeah. But they looked back that far. So, but then they were concerned, well, if there's another macroeconomic meltdown, how could that impact the company going forward? So, yeah, it's when it comes to strategy, that's a big one.
Well, guys, I think we learned a lot of valuable content, so I'm really excited to kind of build off of that. So thank you, Craig, so much for the opportunity to share your content with us. And like I said again, check out the book Tuned In. I know I'm going to buy it, so I'm excited for that. Thank you, Craig.
You bet.